I want you to picture something really specific. You're walking into your kitchen, it's early morning, maybe the sun is just barely starting to creep through the blinds.
Mhm.
The house is quiet, you open the fridge door, the light flickers on with that familiar hum, and you reach for the most innocent, wholesome thing on the shelf, a carton of milk.
Or maybe a jug of orange juice.
Exactly. It's a staple. It's breakfast. It's
I mean,
safety.
it's the absolute definition of a commodity. It is essential,
Mhm.
it is, reliable, and it is in practically every household in the world. You don't think about milk, you just drink it.
You don't question the milk. No, what if I told you that behind that carton of milk, behind that innocent breakfast ritual, lay one of the most sophisticated, massive, and frankly shocking financial crimes in European history?
It sounds like the plot of a thriller novel, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But this was very, very real. We aren't talking of a small accounting error or a CEO fudging his expense report.
Bro.
We are talking about a black hole of debt so massive it effectively swallowed a global empire.
We are talking about Parmalat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a fan of Formula One or European soccer or just Italian culture in general, that name probably rings a bell.
It should. At its peak, this company was a titan. They were sponsoring world champions. They employed tens of thousands of people. They were, for all intents and purposes, the absolute pride of Italy.
And yet, beneath that shiny, wholesome surface, there was a hole, a financial void of roughly 14 billion euros.
Which is about $20 billion at the time.
$20 billion, just
Yeah.
gone, poof, vanished into the ether.
And it wasn't just a case of bad business. This was forgery on an industrial scale. It was hubris. It was a bankruptcy so catastrophic that the Prime Minister of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, had to literally change the country's bankruptcy laws just to deal with the fallout.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to turn into detectives today. I want to know how you hide billions of euros in debt while selling something as simple and tangible as milk. How do you fake $20 billion?
And from my perspective, I want to frame this as a lesson in corporate governance and that too big to fail illusion. The goal is to understand how a simple family business grew into a monster and then just vanished into this intricate web of lies.
We have a mountain of history to climb today, based on historical accounts and business reports detailing the rise, the fall, and the very, very strange afterlife of this company. So grab your coffee or your glass of milk, and let's unpack this.
Now let's get into it.
We have to start at the beginning, because before the fraud, before the police raids, before the, global headlines, there was just a 22-year-old kid in Parma, Italy.
That's right. We are going all the way back to 1961. The protagonist, or maybe antagonist, of our story is a man named Callisto Tanzi.
Callisto Tanzi. Now, painting the picture here, 1961 Italy is in the middle of this huge economic boom, the Miracolo Economico, the Italian economic miracle.
All right. A period of incredible growth and optimism.
Well, Tanzi himself,
Yeah.
He's a college dropout, isn't he?
He is. He's 22 years old, and he opens a small pasteurization plant in Parma. Now, usually when we hear college dropout in these big business stories, we think of Silicon Valley tech geniuses in garages inventing the future.
Right, we think of Steve Jobs or Bill Gates.
Exactly. But this was the dairy business in provincial Italy.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly high-tech. It was as traditional as you could get.
But he did have a tech angle. He wasn't just bottling milk the old-fashioned way. He stumbled onto, or rather, he fully embraced, a piece of technology that changed absolutely everything for him. UHT.
Ultra-high temperature processing.
Okay, let's break this down, because I think most people see UHT on a carton and just assume it means processed or not as good as fresh. Why was this specific technology such a game changer for a business model in the 60s?
You had to think about the logistics of milk in the early 1960s. It's a biological ticking time bomb.
Right, it goes bad fast.
Incredibly quickly. It requires what's called a cold chain, refrigerated trucks, refrigerated warehouses, refrigerated shelves at the retailer. That is incredibly expensive, and more importantly, it limits how far you can ship your product. You have a geographic tether.
So you're trapped in your local area. You can't ship fresh milk from Parma to, say, southern Italy or across the border to France without it turning into cheese or, sour slush on the way.
Precisely. You are fundamentally a local or, at best, a regional business. But UHT processing heats the milk to a very high temperature, about 135 degrees Celsius or 275 Fahrenheit, for a very short time, just a couple of seconds.
Okay.
This kills all the bacteria and spores that cause spoilage. It makes the milk shelf stable. long life milk. Suddenly, you don't need the fridge until you open the carton.
So wait, this wasn't just about selling milk, this was solving a logistics problem.
That's the key insight. It allowed for massive, massive scaling. It turned milk from a local perishable good into a global tradable commodity. You could produce milk in Parma, put it in a box, and ship it anywhere in the world on a regular truck. Tanzi wasn't just a local milkman anymore. He was an industrialist with a product that could travel.
But what about the taste? I mean, that's the elephant in the room with UHT milk. A lot of people really don't like it.
Well, the taste is, it's debatable for some palates accustomed to fresh milk. It definitely has a slightly cooked or caramelized flavor to it.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, in many parts of the world, especially where refrigeration was scarce or the climate was hot, this was a miracle product. It meant you could have safe, nutritious milk in the cupboard for months without needing a refrigerator. For millions of people, it was a revolution.
And Tinsley rode that wave. This kicks off what we can really call the golden era of expansion for Parmalat. For 2 decades, they're just on an absolute tear.
It was incredibly aggressive growth. And they didn't just stick to milk. They diversified very quickly. They realized they had this amazing distribution network, so why not fill the trucks with other things?
Makes sense. Once you have the infrastructure, use it. What else were they selling?
Well, the history of the company lists a whole pantry's worth of goods. Fruit juices, tea, bakery products like biscuits and pastries, and of course what the official documents call milk derivatives.
Which just sounds so incredibly unappetizing when you say it like that. Pass me the milk derivative, please.
It just means things made from milk. Yogurt, cheese, ice cream, butter. They were building a full food portfolio.
And they weren't just staying in Italy. They went global with this.
Huge expansion. By 2002, looking back at this era, they were operating in 30 countries. They had 30,000 employees. This was a true multinational corporation. They were massive in Brazil, Venezuela, South Africa, Australia.
But here is where it gets really interesting to me. Beyond just the business growth, it wasn't enough to just be big. They wanted to look big. They wanted to look like winners. And how do you do that in Europe and South America in the 70s and 80s?
Sports.
Sports. Massive, high-visibility sports marketing.
Kanzi understood something fundamental about branding. To build a global brand, you need credibility. You need to be seen. And nothing gives you instant credibility and a perception of wealth, like plastering your logo on a winning team in a sport that just screams money.
So let's talk about Formula One, because this is where the image of Parmalat really got burned into people's retinas. If you look at photos from the late 70s and 80s, that blue and white logo is everywhere.
From 1978 to 1984, Parmalat wasn't just a sponsor. They were the title sponsor of the Brabham Formula One team.
And this wasn't a back-of-the-grid team. This wasn't some team just making up the numbers.
Not at all. This was a front-running, championship-contending team. They were associated with absolute legends. Niki Lauda drove for them, Nelson Piquet. Piquet won the World Championship in 1981 and 1983, driving a Brabham car with Parmalat written in huge letters all over it. When you saw that car, often a beautiful deep blue and white, you saw the Parmalat logo. It became synonymous with speed, precision, technology, and success.
And they didn't stop there, did they? They sponsored Ligier, Arrows, Sauber, even the short-lived 40 team later on. They were a fixture in the paddock for decades.
And then there was football soccer. This was arguably even bigger for their brand recognition in Europe and South America. They owned Parma FC in Italy.
Which, under their ownership, had a golden age of its own. I mean, they were a provincial team that suddenly started winning European trophies. They had world-class players like Gianluigi Buffon, Fabio Cannavaro, Hernan Crespo.
Legends of the game. And they also owned Palmeiras in Brazil, one of the biggest clubs in South America. The brand visibility was immense.
I want to pause on the psychology of this for a second, because this isn't just vanity, right? Or is it partly vanity? If you are an investor or a banker or just a regular person in the supermarket, and you see this company's logo on a Formula One car driven by a world champion, what do you think?
You think they are rich, you think they are stable, you think they are powerful. Formula One is an incredibly expensive sport. It is a money pit. If a company can afford to burn hundreds of millions of dollars on racing cars and superstar soccer players, surely their core business finances are rock solid.
It creates an aura of invincibility.
Exactly. It acts as a shield against scrutiny. Who's going to question the accounting of the company that sponsors a world champion? It seems absurd.
It's the ultimate fake it till you make it, except they had actually made it in terms of selling milk. They were selling real products. The sales were real, but the spending, the spending to maintain that image, that's where things start to get murky.
And that leads us directly to the pivotal shift in the company's strategy. We're moving into the late 1990s.
Right. So we have this successful, highly visible dairy empire. But in 1997, something fundamental changes. They decide that selling milk isn't enough. They want to play in the financial markets.
This is the critical turning point in the story. The historical record shows that in 1997, Parmalat officially expands its operations into financial markets. They start financing their international acquisitions, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, by using huge amounts of debt.
Using debt, that phrase always makes me nervous when we talk about corporate history. It's like hearing ominous music in a horror movie.
It should make you nervous. Essentially, they started acting less like a dairy company and more like a hedge fund that just happened to own some cows. They weren't just making money from operations anymore. They were juggling complex financial instruments.
But why? I mean, if the milk business was so good, why start gambling on Wall Street?
Well, the thing is, the margins on milk are actually quite thin. It's a high-volume, low-margin commodity. The incredible growth of the 70s and 80s was starting to slow down. But to keep the stock price up, to keep the banks happy, and to fund this lavish sports empire and the Tansey family's other interests, they needed more cash than the milk business could provide.
So they turned to the dark arts of finance to juice the numbers.
That's one way to put it. And by 2001, the cracks were really starting to show internally. Many of these new divisions, especially the ones they'd bought with all that debt, were losing money. The core business was struggling to support the weight of this massive, inefficient empire.
So what do? Do they cut costs? Do they downsize the F1 sponsorship? Do they sell off the money-losing parts?
Knowing Tansey's ego, what do you think?
I'm going to guess that's a hard no.
No. They did the opposite. They doubled down. They shifted to using derivatives.
Okay, derivatives. That is a word that makes people's eyes glaze over. It sounds incredibly boring and technical. But in this story, it's the murder weapon. How do we explain this simply in the context of what Parmalat was doing?
Think of a derivative as a complex financial bet. Its value is derived from something else, like the price of oil, or an interest rate, or a currency exchange rate. Now, companies use them all the time for legitimate reasons, like hedging.
Right, like an airline buying a derivative to lock in a future price for jet fuel so they don't get wiped out if the price skyrockets.
Exactly. That's responsible business. But the investigations later showed that Parmalat used them, and I'm quoting here, apparently at least in part with the intention of hiding the extent of its losses and debt.
So they weren't hedging, they were hiding. They were using these complex bets to mask the fact that they were bleeding money. It's like using a smoke machine and mirrors to hide a raging fire in the building.
That's a perfect analogy. They were cooking the books. They were creating these incredibly complex, opaque transactions between offshore shell companies that made it look like money was coming in, or that debts didn't exist when they very much did.
But the outside world didn't see the kitchen, right? They just saw the beautifully presented menu. They saw the stock price.
The market had no idea. In fact, this is the wildest part.
Mm-hmm.
On April 22, 2002, with all this internal rot festering, Parmalat's share price hit a record high.
A record high, while they were secretly drowning in billions of dollars of hidden debt.
The company was valued at 3.7 billion euros. The market...
It's just incredible tension. On the outside, you have investors cheering, the stock is soaring, the Formula One cars are racing around Monaco. On the inside, the executives must have been sweating bullets every single day, just trying to keep the plate spinning.
And that disconnect between valuation and reality can only last so long. Eventually, gravity takes over. You can only juggle that much debt for so long before you drop a ball.
And gravity arrived with a vengeance in 2003. This is where the house of cards doesn't just wobble, it collapses.
The timeline here is fascinating because it happens so quickly once the first domino falls. It goes from everything is fine to absolute apocalypse in a matter of months.
So take us to February 2003. What is the trigger? What's the first crack that appears?
It starts with the chief financial officer, a man named Fausto Tana. He was one of Tansey's closest lieutenants. He suddenly announces a new bond issue worth 300 billion euros.
A bond issue basically means they're asking the market to lend them more money, right?
Correct. They're issuing debt. But here is the twist. This announcement comes as a complete surprise to the CEO, Callisto Tansey.
Wait. The CFO tries to raise 300 million euros in emergency funds without the CEO knowing about it. That's beyond dysfunctional.
It's incredibly dysfunctional, and it spooked the markets. Think about it. Parmalat had been telling everyone they had huge cash reserves. They claimed they had billions in the bank. So why does this cash-rich, successful company suddenly need a quick, desperate injection of 300 million euros?
It smells of desperation. It smells like someone needs to pay a bill today and the drawer is empty.
It does. And Tanzi reacts furiously. He forces Tana to resign.
You're out. He makes him the scapegoat.
Exactly. And he brings in a new CFO, a man named Alberto Ferraris, hoping to calm the markets.
Now, I want to put myself in the shoes of poor Alberto Ferraris for a moment. He walks into this job thinking he's taking over the finances of a premier Italian corporation. He probably thinks this is the pinnacle of his career.
And he gets the shock of his life. Ferraris gave an interview later to Time magazine, and he described this moment. He sits down, ready to work, asks for the books, and discovers that even though he is the chief financial officer of this multi-billion-euro company, he doesn't have access to all the corporate accounts.
That is a massive, flashing, screaming red flag. That's like a pilot getting into the cockpit and finding out the controls are locked. Who has the books?
The chief accounting officer, a man named Luciano del Soldato, who reported directly to the old CFO, Honoris. He controlled a parallel set of books, a shadow accounting system.
So the CFO is locked out of the accounting room, essentially.
Yes, but Ferraris is smart. He knows something is profoundly wrong. He starts making inquiries. He starts digging into the web of offshore subsidiaries, and he begins to suspect that the total debt of the company is more than double what is shown on the official balance sheet.
Double. So if they said they owed $5 billion, it was actually $10 million or more.
Or worse, he realizes the numbers simply don't add up. The cash they claim to have can't be verified.
So naturally the panic sets in. September 2003 rolls around.
That 300 million euro fundraising plan is dropped because the scrutiny is now too high. No one wants to lend them money. The markets are getting jittery. The share price starts plummeting. And then a new mysterious name enters the chat. Epicurum.
Epicurum. Sounds like a spell from Harry Potter. Or a villain's evil corporation. What is Epicurum?
It was a mutual fund based in the Cayman Islands.
Of course it's in the Cayman Islands. It's always the Cayman Islands in these stories.
Naturally. Parmalat claimed they had invested hundreds of millions of euros into this fund. It was a major asset on their books. But auditors started asking pointed questions. They wanted to verify these transactions. They wanted proof that this investment was real and liquid.
And Ferraris, the new CFO who's asking too many questions, he doesn't last long, does he?
No. He resigns in November after a public fallout with Tanzi. He lasted less than a year. He probably realized the ship was sinking and got on the first lifeboat he could find. You can't blame him. I'm not going to jail for this.
No way. So who takes over?
Luciano del Soldato, the guy who was hiding the books, is promoted to CFO.
The fox is now officially guarding the henhouse.
But even the fox couldn't fix this. The hole was too big. Del Soldato resigns just 1 month later.
A month.
Because he needed to get cash from that Epicurum fund to pay debts and make bond payments totaling at least 150 million euros that were coming due. He tried to liquidate the investment, and he couldn't get the money.
Because the money probably wasn't there. It was another phantom asset.
Exactly. And this leads us to the climax, the absolute smoking gun. This is the moment the entire global financial world gasped.
The Parmalat forgery.
Parmalat Financing Corporation was another subsidiary set up in the Cayman Islands. Parmalat claimed that Parmalat had a bank account with Bank of America in New York containing a significant amount of cash.
How significant are we talking?
3.95 billion euros.
Almost 4 billion euros just sitting in a single bank account. That's an insane amount of cash for any company to just have sitting around.
That's what they claimed. They used this supposed account on their balance sheet to offset their massive debts. Yes, we owe billions, but look, we have this huge 4 billion euro savings account. We're fine. Then, the auditors and Bank of America finally communicated directly. Bank of America releases a document on December 19, 2003, and they revealed that the document Parmalat had been using to prove this money existed was a complete and utter forgery.
A forgery. Now, when you say forgery, was this some high-tech Ocean's 11 digital hacking job?
No. And this is the part that is almost comical if it weren't so tragic. Reports from the investigation suggest it was laughably crude. We're talking about a document that was allegedly created using a scanner, a printer, and maybe some scissors and glue or tape.
You're kidding.
They literally faked a bank confirmation letter On what was supposed to be Bank of America letterhead, they scanned a real signature, pasted it onto a fake document, and then photocopied it multiple times to try and hide the imperfections.
That is absurd. A global multinational corporation, a titan of Italian industry sponsoring Formula One champions, is faking a €4 billion bank balance with a scanner and a photocopier.
It shows the sheer level of desperation they had reached. It was a complete fabrication. The money did not exist. Not a single cent of that $3.95 billion was real.
I just want to pause on the magnitude of that. We aren't talking about fudging the profit margins by 1% or 2%. We are talking about inventing nearly €4 billion out of thin air. That's the GDP of a small island nation.
It's staggering. When that news hit the wires, it was over. The game was up. There was no spinning that. A forged document for €4 billion.
So Tanzi resigns. The firm is declared insolvent in late December 2003. And now the investigators finally get to go in and see just how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Tanzi initially admits to a hole, as he called it, of €8 billion.
I only lost $8 billion, guys. Relax. It's just $8 billion. It's incredible hubris even in the confession.
It is. But the administration auditors, the forensic accountants, they get to work. They start peeling back the layers of shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fake transactions, and the real number. The total debt was €14.3 billion.
$14.3 billion.
It was almost 8 times the sum originally stated by the company to the public. To this day, it remains Europe's biggest bankruptcy.
So how did they do it? I mean, apart from the fake bank account with the photocopier, how do you hide $14 billion in debt for years?
Well, the expert analysis from the aftermath points to a few core mechanisms. One was the creation of these phantom assets using things called credit-linked notes.
Talk us through that, because that sounds like financial word salad designed to confuse people.
It is complicated, but let's try an analogy. Imagine I write an IOU to myself for $1 million. I put that IOU in my safe. Then I go to the bank and say, hey, I have an asset worth $1 million in my safe. Please lend me money against it.
Okay, but the asset is just a promise from you to you. It's worthless.
Exactly. But if I set up a shell company, the Cayman Islands, and I have that company write the IOU to my main company, and I dress it up in complex legal language to make it look like a legitimate investment, suddenly it looks like a real asset on my balance sheet. The official source material describes it as placing a bet on its own creditworthiness to conjure up an asset out of thin air.
So they were betting that they would be able to pay themselves back using money they didn't have. It's a completely circular, self-referential piece of financial engineering.
It is. You create an asset that is essentially just a reflection of your own debt. It works fine on paper until someone asks for the actual cash. Then the circle breaks.
But it wasn't just complex financial engineering, was it? It was also good old-fashioned theft and diversion of funds. Where was the actual cash going? Because they were selling milk. Real cash was coming in the door every day.
A lot of it was being siphoned off. Tanzi admitted during interrogations to diverting hundreds of millions of euros to Parmalat, which was a travel group owned by his family. It was a financial disaster, losing money hand over fist. He was propping it up with Parmalat's money.
And to the football clubs as well, right? To pay for those superstar players?
Yes, but there was another, even bigger hole. This was about his personal ambition. There was a media rivalry involved. This wasn't just about money. It was about power and prestige in Italy.
You're talking about his rivalry with Silvio Berlusconi.
Yes. At the time, Berlusconi was not only the prime minister, but also Italy's biggest media mogul, the most powerful man in the country.
And Tanzi wanted to be on that level.
He wanted a seat at that table. He tried to buy a television network called Odeon TV to rival Berlusconi's media empire. It was an absolute disaster. He had no idea what he was doing in the media world. He eventually sold it at a huge loss, about 45 million euros gone, just like that.
So this wasn't just greed, it was ego. It was a failed attempt to build a dynastic empire across media, sports, and tourism to compete with the likes of Berlusconi and the other great Italian industrialists.
And he used the public company, the milk money from shareholders and bondholders, to fund it all. He treated Parmalat like his own personal piggy bank.
So the House of Cards is down. The police are at the door. Let's talk about justice, or the lack thereof, in the aftermath, because usually in these massive white-collar crime stories, the top guys walk away with a slap on the wrist.
Well, Callisto Tanzi was detained hours after the firm was declared insolvent. He was arrested, along with 5 other executives. The image of Tanzi, this man who had been treated like royalty in Italy for decades, being led away in handcuffs, was a huge national moment.
And what happened to him? Did he actually serve time?
He did. He was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for fraud relating to the collapse. Later, there were other sentences for other aspects of the bankruptcy, like fraudulent bankruptcy and market rigging, which brought the total sentence to nearly 18 years.
10 to 18 years for a 14 billion euro fraud. It feels, I don't know, when you look at the scale of the damage, hundreds of thousands of small investors, pensioners who bought Parmalat bonds thinking they were as safe as government bonds, lost their life savings.
It's a profound tragedy. And while Tanzi went to jail, there was a lot of public anger about the others who were involved.
What about them? The other executives, the bankers?
7 other defendants, including executives and some bankers, were acquitted in one of the main trials.
Acquitted? How is that possible?
It's very hard to prove intent in these incredibly complex financial cases. I didn't know the full picture or I was just following orders is a powerful defense. Plausible deniability is built into the complexity.
But what about the enablers? We have to talk about the big banks and the auditors. Because how does an auditor whose only job is to check the numbers miss a 14 billion euro hole? How do they not verify a 4 billion euro bank account?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? The new management of Parmalat, the people brought in to clean up the mess under government supervision, they went on a warpath. They sued the gatekeepers, Bank of America, Deloitte, and Grant Thornton International, who was their auditor.
The allegation being that they were either grossly, almost criminally incompetent, or they were in on it.
The official allegation was that they were negligent and had aided and abetted the fraud. Basically, they either kept the scheme going by not doing their jobs properly, or they actively looked the other way because the fees were so good. Parmalat was a huge, prestigious client. You don't want to upset that kind of client by asking too many hard questions.
And did they pay for this alleged negligence?
They did. They settled. Deloitte settled for $149 million. Bank of America settled for $100 million. Grant Thornton settled for a smaller amount, around $4.4 million.
So in total, the new management recovered about $700 million through these lawsuits.
Which, on its own, sounds like a lot of money.
It does, until you remember the whole was $14.3 billion. It's pennies on the dollar. It's less than 5 cents for every dollar that was lost.
Exactly. It helps the company survive, but it doesn't make the investors whole. Not even close.
It does raise that interesting discussion point, though. Does paying a massive settlement like that admit guilt?
Legally, absolutely not. The settlements always come with a carefully worded statement saying, we admit no wrongdoing, but practically, in the court of public opinion, it suggests they knew they had significant legal exposure. They knew that if this went in front of a jury, they could lose a lot more. They paid to make the problem go away.
So Parmalat, the corporate entity, is shattered. The founder is in jail. The money is gone. But, and this is the crazy part of the story, I can still go to the store today and buy Parmalat milk. I saw it on the shelf yesterday.
You absolutely can. And this is the resurrection chapter of our story. And frankly, it's just as dramatic and revealing as the fall.
Because Parmalat, the brand and the operation, didn't die.
No. The Italian government stepped in immediately. And this was under Berlusconi, ironically enough, given Tanzi's rivalry with him. They passed an emergency decree, changing the bankruptcy laws to allow for an accelerated protection process for large strategic companies.
Why? To save the company.
To save the jobs and the industrial infrastructure. They appointed a super commissioner, an industrial turnaround specialist named Enrico Bondi, to save the operational part of the company.
Because at the end of the day, the fraud was in the finance department, the cows were still producing milk, the factories were still pasteurizing it, and people still wanted to buy breakfast.
That is the key insight. The core business, the actual industrial operation of moving white liquid from cows to cartons, was viable. It was even profitable in many areas. It was the financial superstructure built on top of it that was rotten to the core. Bondi's job was to strip away all the rot.
So he cut the sports sponsorships, the F1 cars, the football clubs.
All gone. Immediately. He sold off non-core assets. He shut down the useless offshore companies. He focused purely on the milk and the food products.
And it worked. By 2011, the company is back on its feet.
Surprisingly, yes. It was a remarkable turnaround. By 2011, they were healthy again. They had paid down debt, and they had grown their cash reserves to 1.5 billion euros. They were sitting on a mountain of cash.
Which made them a target for takeover. Because in the world of capitalism, if you have a lot of cash and a strong, globally recognized brand, Someone is going to try to buy you.
Enter the French.
A company called Lactalis.
Lactalis is a privately owned French multinational dairy giant. They're owned by the Besnier family, who are known for being incredibly secretive and ruthlessly aggressive in their business dealings. In March 2011, they saw their opportunity and started buying up Parmalat shares on the open market.
And this wasn't a friendly, hey, let's merge conversation, was it? This was hostile.
No, this was a corporate raid. They quietly purchased nearly 30% of the company on the open market before anyone in the Italian government or business establishment really knew what was happening. Then they launched a full takeover offer for the rest.
The Italians must have hated this. Parmalat was a national champion, a symbol of Italian industry. Losing it to their rivals, the French.
There was a huge political outcry. Defend Italian industry. We can't let this happen. But the reality was, the shareholders wanted the money. The Lactalis offer was a good one. By July 2011, they had succeeded. Lactalis controlled over 80% of the company,
For a price of about 2.5 billion euros.
which honestly was an absolute steal when you consider the global footprint of the brand they were acquiring. They bought a global infrastructure for a bargain price, all because the fraud had made it vulnerable.
But the drama didn't end there. Lactalis wanted to take the company private, right? They wanted to delist it from the stock exchange so they didn't have to deal with public reporting requirements and minority shareholders anymore.
And that turned into a years-long battle. This is the part that plays out like a corporate courtroom drama. They tried in 2016 to buy out the remaining shareholders. They offered 2.8 euros per share, then had to raise it to 3 euros.
Who was stopping them? If they owned over 80%, why couldn't they just do it?
A very aggressive activist hedge fund called Amber Capital, along with other minority shareholders. They dug their heels in. They argued the price was far too low and that Lactalis was trying to steal the rest of the company from them on the cheap. They fought them in the courts and in the press for years.
It's so ironic. A company destroyed by complex financial engineering becomes the battleground for activist hedge funds years later.
It is, but eventually the French won. Lactalis has incredibly deep pockets and more patience. They kept raising their offer slightly, buying more shares. By 2019, they finally reached 95% ownership, which allowed them to forcibly buy the rest and delist the company.
So today, Parmalat is no longer an Italian public company. It's a subsidiary of a private French multinational.
And the cost to Italy was significant. The source material notes that Lactalis moved all strategic activities, the headquarters, the decision-making to France. The brain of the company left Parma. Over the years, operations in Italy were wound down or consolidated. Even the future of the historical factory in Rome was in doubt in 2019.
It's a tragic end to an Italian industrial icon, born in Parma, destroyed by internal fraud, rescued by the state, and then swallowed up by a foreign competitor.
It's a common story in modern globalization.
Mm-hmm.
But the fraud is what made it possible. It left the company wounded and vulnerable to a predator.
And yet, despite all this, the fraud, the jail time, the foreign takeover, the brand is still massive today.
It is. If we look at their current state, they have operations all over the world. Europe, North and South America, Australia, China, South Africa. The brand itself survived everything.
I was looking at the list of countries where they have a direct presence. It's expensive. Canada, Russia, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Romania.
And then they have license agreements in huge markets like the USA, Brazil, Spain, and China. You can find their products almost everywhere.
And they still have a huge portfolio of brands. It's not just Parmalat UHT milk anymore.
No, they own Santal Juices, which is a huge brand, Malou desserts, Kir yogurts. The company today has something like 140 production centers around the world and still employs around 16,000 people.
16,000 people. That's 16,000 families relying on this company for their livelihood.
Which brings us back to why the government intervened in the first place. You can't just let a company that size evaporate overnight, even if the leadership was completely criminal. The collateral damage to the real economy is just too high.
So let's wrap this up. We've gone on this incredible journey from a 22-year-old dreamer in a small Italian town in 1961 to a global dairy king, to a financial fraudster, to a prisoner.
And we saw the scale of the fake money. That 3.95 billion euro forgery. The image of someone at a global corporation using a scanner and a photocopier to fake the GDP of a small country, that is going to stick with me.
It really is the fake it till you make it strategy taken to its most criminal and ultimately absurd extreme. They faked it until they broke everything.
But I think the big takeaway for me is really about oversight and complexity.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale. When the CFO, the person whose entire job is to manage the money, can't see all the books, run. When a company is making more of its supposed profit from financial derivatives than from selling its actual product, run. When the complexity of the finance completely overshadows the simplicity of the core business, that is a massive warning sign.
It's a powerful reminder that even the most boring, everyday industries can hide the wildest secrets. You look at a carton of milk and you think stability. You think wholesome. You don't think Cayman Islands Mutual Fund and credit-linked notes.
But that's exactly where the danger lies. We lower our guard with established household names. We assume they are safe because they are familiar. We assume that because we see their logo on a soccer jersey or an F1 car, the money must be real.
I want to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought today. Something to chew on.
Let's hear it.
Parmalat, the financial entity, collapsed because of a 14 billion euro hole. It was a fraud. It was a lie.
Yeah.
And yet, the products are still on the shelves today. The milk is real. The juice is real.
The factories were real. The trucks were real. The workers were real.
Exactly. So if a company is built on a foundation of financial fraud but makes a real, tangible product that people need and want, what actually is the value of that company? Is it the number on the balance sheet? Or is it the physical thing they put in your hand?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? The difference between the financial economy and the real economy. Parmalat proved they can be completely, terrifyingly disconnected from one another.
And here is the scary part of that question. How many other stable, blue-chip giants are currently out there betting on their own creditworthiness to conjure assets out of thin air right now? How many other CFOs are sitting in their offices staring at a locked door to the accounting department?
We might not know until the next crisis hits.
On that cheery note, go check your fridge. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Goodbye.
See you next time.